Creating annotations or marking your text. It's an incredibly important skill for a number of reasons. First of all, we've found that highlighting can be very helpful, but highlighting alone is usually just not enough to separate main ideas from details. And even though you might use your highlighter creatively, as I suggested in that PowerPoint, it still is hard to see what is the most important from highlighting alone. Another thing is that highlighting doesn't sort of rank order the items in order of importance. It's usually done in one color and everything looks pretty much the same. Highlighting also does not indicate the relationship between facts and ideas. Does something cause another? Or, which came first? So we have to rely on other methods to help us. So another way that we can stay really active, and we know how important that is because we mentioned earlier that you'll never read a textbook again with an empty hand. You always need to be doing something. So annotating fills that need. It's an active reading strategies where you sum up information in the text by using signs and symbols and writing key ideas in the margins in your own words. Very important. It doesn't do you much good to copy verbatim something that's appearing in the text in the margin. It really needs to be something that you processed and it's in your own words. That's what will make it memorable. You can also in your annotations include, ideas and examples and definitions, as long as you develop an effective set of symbols to mark your text and you use those symbols constantly. So how do you do this? Well, as with many strategies, you need to read first and then write. So you're going to stop reading after each section or few paragraphs, and then you'll go back and annotate what you just read. Now again, how much? It depends on how new you are to the concepts that are being discussed in the reading. If you have some familiarity, you may be able to read a page or two. If you have little to no familiarity, you may want to stop after each section or even after each paragraph to annotate what you've just read. And then you're going to use a consistent system of symbols. And those are, personalized to each of us. There are some that just seem to fit better for us than others. But it's important that you use a variety of symbols and not just rely on underlining. You need to look at the other types of markings that we can do, such as those that were discussed on the annotation bookmark or the annotation symbol video that we just looked at. So why would you even want to take the time to annotate? Well, first of all, it's because you have to think about the information to decide what's important to read. And so by doing that, it keeps you awake, alive, and involved. Another piece of information is that it promotes effective learning. By annotating, you are manipulating the information so that you've read it and now you're writing about it or you're making marks about it, and that helps to transfer it from working memory into long-term memory. And then you can select the information that you want to remember and that you think is important. You then reduce the amount of overall information on that page to a more manageable amount that you can review and master. So when you reorganize information, it makes it meaningful to you and it makes it easier for you to remember in the long run. Your very act of trying to tell the difference between what's a major concept and what's the supporting idea, or what's the definitions of terms and where are the terms, anytime you make those kind of decisions, you are, again, transferring information to working memory with the hopes that it'll eventually transfer to long-term memory. And it'll transfer to long-term memory as you review the annotations over the course of time. When you monitor your reading, if you can put things in your own words, then you've comprehended it. We all know that sinking feeling of having read a chapter with empty hands, and we close the chapter and we can't remember anything we read. So active reading strategies are incredibly important to help you avoid that feeling that you've just read a chapter and you don't know what happened. So what is it exactly that you should annotate? Well, I definitely would annotate definitions. I really like the way most textbooks use boldface and even a different colored font for vocabulary words. But even so, I've seen students who really prefer to kind of bracket off or box off or circle the definitions. And if you circle definitions, then don't circle anything else. Use your symbols for specific purposes on a consistent basis. Then many times the definition that follows a key vocabulary word is most easily annotated by simply putting a bracket at the beginning and a bracket at the end. You might want to annotate some of the examples, call those out into notes in the margins. People, places, and events. Here's a good place to differentiate between whether you're using a box or a circle. Some people prefer to use boxes for vocabulary words, and then they'll circle people, places, dates, events, other things that are important. Again, it's being consistent with the way that you use the symbols that's most important. Anytime you run across a reading where you have numbered lists or characteristics, for instance, the 5 leading causes to, make sure that as you hit each of those causes in the reading, you make a very recognizable number, probably even circle that number so that it stands out. That way, since you've probably double underlined the main idea, which is the 5 leading causes in the beginning of the paragraph, it'll make those next 5 things so much easier to review. You also want to be able to look at what we consider relationships between concepts, and that's where those arced arrows come in very handy to show that something is a cause and then here's the effect, or something is being compared to something else. So consider using those arcs with arrows to show those types of relationships. So jot notes on how to use the information, though that's a very good thing to do in the margin. Again, those arced arrows can show how information relates to each other. You can comment on something. Perhaps you want to argue with an author's point of view, or you want to make a marginal note to ask a question in class about that particular concept. You can decide how topics fit together, make connecting notes in order to process the information at a deeper level. And you can also use things like graphs and charts because they summarize large quantities of information, and you should almost always have some type of a marginal note next to a graph or a chart. Now there are some pitfalls. If you copy word for word rather than writing in your own words, the information is not really going to be very useful to you because it's just sort of like rote repetition. Instead, you want to say things in your own words when you write those margin notes. If you don't, annotate enough, then there's nothing to study, and then in that case, you end up having to reread the chapter. You don't want to reread the chapter. That takes too much time. If you annotate well to begin with, you'll never have to reread that chapter. You'll just have to look at your annotations. Sometimes people want to avoid marking in their text because they want to resell their textbook. Totally understandable. Try using sticky notes, which are available in a wide range of sizes instead. Sometimes, if we don't record enough in our annotations, we don't really have enough to make sense of. So you want to write everything you'll think you'll need to remember in the long run. Good luck with your annotations.